But he tells her in this moment where he's like, belonging to someone is actually a beautiful thing. The same way with how he saw the birdcage as something beautiful and a positive thing, whereas to her, it doesn't matter how pretty it is. She still sees it as a negative thing. Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote, released in 1958. And the movie adaptation was released in 1961 and is directed by Blake Edwards. And the reason I'm covering this is because it won a book versus movie poll, and I post those polls about every month. So you should definitely subscribe to my channel if you have not already. That way you can be aware of when I post one of those polls, and it gives you the chance to participate in choosing my book versus movie content. And this book and movie are about the life of young New York socialite Holly Golightly, as told to us through the eyes of one of her friends, a writer who she calls Fred. And I'm just going to get right into the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. And I'm going to begin with the narrator. So in both the first time Holly meets him, she tells him that she is going to call him Fred because he reminds her of her brother, who she loves and was very close to, but he is now fighting in the war. And in the book, we never find out the guy's real name. He's just called Fred. Whereas in the movie, we do find out that his name is Paul. But throughout the course of this video, I'm just going to call him Fred. And in the movie, he is basically like the boy toy of this rich married woman who is played by Patricia Neal, who is someone I have mentioned a few times now. I talked about her in my video for HUD, as well as my video for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, because she had been married to Roald Dahl. So she has a pretty interesting personal life. But yeah, she plays this woman and she pays for his apartment, for his clothing, she decorates his apartment, and in general, she just gives him money to live on because, like I said, he is a writer, but he's not a successful one. And partway through the story, he does begin to fall in love with Holly, so he breaks things off with this woman. And she is not in the book at all, and I thought she was an interesting added element to the movie, because in the movie, both Fred and Holly, the way they make money is basically by being a paid companion for people, right? And having sex with them. And it's interesting because Holly, she is not ashamed of this, and she is just very matter of fact at how she makes her money. Whereas whenever she mentions this to Fred about the fact that he gets money from this woman, he gets very defensive and is very sensitive about it. And in the book, it's not explicitly said, but it is implied that Fred is gay, whereas in the movie, he's straight. And in both, he and Holly do have quarrels and arguments at different points throughout the story. And in the book, after certain arguments, they don't talk for long periods of time, whereas in the movie, they always make amends pretty quickly. But to talk about Holly, so in the book, her full name is Holiday Golightly, which I thought was just such a cute name, Holiday. But we find out in both book and movie that her real name is Lula May, because partway through the story, her ex-husband shows up, and turns out she had been a teen bride and she had been raising children he'd had in a previous relationship, and her brother Fred had also lived with them. However, at one point she just decides to leave and she runs away. And so this guy has been tracking her down, and also Fred at this point has left to join the military and he is fighting in the war. But so this guy tracks Holly down to bring her back home, and in the movie she says that the marriage had been annulled, so technically they're not even married anymore. Whereas in the book, I guess the marriage is technically still a thing, but Holly is like, I was like 14 or 15 when I married him. Like I wasn't even old enough to be making those choices, and I am not going to go back home with him. Even though she still like has a love for him, but she's like, no, I'm not going back there. And so in both, he tries to convince her to return, but in both, she does not. But also in both, after she meets up with him and he finds out her address, later in the story, he sends her a telegram letting her know that her brother Fred had died at war. And again, she had been very close to him and had loved him. And it's also implied that he may have had like a mental disability because he was kind of slow. But yeah, obviously his death is very difficult for her. And yeah, throughout the course of the book and movie, she doesn't have any like serious relationships. She is with this guy named Rusty Trawler, but it's not like, yeah, it doesn't come across as like a serious relationship she has with him. But near the end of the story, she gets engaged to a man named Jose from South America. And so she is going to be flying to South America soon to live with him. But also I need to talk about Sally Tomato, because in both, once a week, she will visit the Sing Sing prison, and she meets up with Sally Tomato and he will tell her the weather report. And then she meets up with Sally's lawyer later and she reiterates what Sally told her, and then the lawyer pays her money. So she does this once a week. And in the book, she tells Fred about this the first time they meet and she's kind of drunk. And then when he mentions it at a later point, she responds in a way that makes him feel that, one, she regrets having told him about it, and two, she doesn't want him to bring it up again. Whereas in the movie, she's very open talking about this, and she even brings Fred Fred along at one point, which was not the case in the book. But in both, Holly ends up being arrested. In the movie, Holly and Fred are both arrested because they are together at this time. However, in the book, it is just Holly, but she is arrested because it is found out that Sally is still running drug deals from prison, and these weather reports he's giving her is how he's, making decisions. And so she is arrested, and throughout this book and movie, she's constantly surrounded with people and has all these friends. However, once she's in prison, almost everybody just leaves her high and dry. And even Jose, her fiance, he writes her a letter saying that he is too much of a coward and he can't be with her due to her reputation now, and he breaks things off with her. Fred is like one of the only people who still stands by her side and tries to help her. And in the end, she decides that she is still going to go to South America. And so she has this cat that she has not given a name, and she tosses it out, and then she gets on a plane and goes to South America, and that's that. We hear about Fred years later, and he still doesn't really know what's happening with Holly. She did write him asking him to get her cat, and so he does find it, and he's been caring for her cat ever since. And he and other people who had been obsessed with Holly are always trying to find clues about like where in the world she may be, but it's just kind of a mystery. And this is different from the movie, because in the movie, she's in the taxi, she's still going to fly to South America, but Fred, he has already told her that he loves her at a different point. And so in the taxi, he's telling her like, I love you, like, why are you leaving? Like, stay here and be with me. But she is just kind of shutting him down, not wanting to be with him because she has a fear of commitment, essentially, and being tied down. And marrying Jose, like, she wasn't really going to be tied down because she didn't actually love him. So she's scared of a relationship with someone who actually loves her and when she loves them. And so he is upset and he storms off and leaves, and he is looking for the cat, which she tossed out in the rain. And as she is sitting there after he left, she realizes like, wait a minute, what am I doing? Like, I do love him. He's right. And so she runs out of the cab, goes to look for the cat with him. She finds the cat, and then they hug and kiss in the rain while holding the cat, and happily ever after. But this idea of like her fear of a loving, committed relationship is kind of shown in the book through a birdcage, because she gifts Fred this very ornate birdcage at one point, but she tells him like never put anything in that because even though it's beautiful, she still sees it as like a cage and a trap. And Fred, however, he thinks it's beautiful and he loves it, and he doesn't see it as a negative thing. And at one point they get in an argument, and he like gives her the cage back, but then she puts it out on the curb to be thrown away, and he sees it and he doesn't want it thrown away, so then he takes it. And we hear that he takes this cage with him throughout his travels, even though it's like awkward to transport. And yet even so, he says how he takes it with him everywhere he goes. And so the way they see this cage differently is seen in the movie, right? In this last scene when he's telling her like, you're afraid of being in an actual relationship because you're worried you will be trapped. And yet this fear is keeping you trapped. So you're still in a cage, but it's a cage of your own making. And also he tells her like, I love you, you belong to me. And that of course is like a trigger word for her, because she's like, what? Like, I don't belong to anybody. You can't tie me down. But he tells her in this moment where he's like, belonging to someone is actually a beautiful thing, and you're missing out. You're doing yourself a disservice by shutting people off from this and not allowing yourself to love them and not allowing others to love you. The same way with how he saw the birdcage as something beautiful and a positive thing, whereas to her, it doesn't matter how pretty it is. She still sees it as a negative thing. And also because she's a call girl, and so she makes money by being a companion for men. The men though, they're constantly like following her and harassing her and wanting to claim ownership over her, especially when money is involved, right? Like they might pay her money and she does as much as fitting for that, but because they've given her money, it makes them feel entitled, like they deserve even more of her time and attention. And so yeah, men are constantly trying to claim ownership over her. And Fred tries to claim ownership, not because he's given her money, but because he loves her. And so he's like, you belong to me, like I love you. And yeah, in the movie, her character totally does a 180 and she's like, you know what? You're right. It is good to belong to somebody, and I do want that, and I have been keeping myself in a cage. Whereas in the book, like, we don't know what happens to Holly, right? So in some ways, this reminds me of the Virgin Suicides, where it's about the female characters, but it's almost even more so about the men telling us the story, right? And how these women have taken on a life of their own in their mind, right? Because there's so much mystery, they've just become something so much more more. And so who knows, maybe Holly has settled down, but we don't know, and it almost doesn't even matter. What matters is the way Fred thinks of her and the way he has created her in his mind as the years have gone on, the same way in the Virgin Suicides, the way the boys, as they became men, the way they thought of the sisters in their mind, you know? So I thought that was an interesting parallel between these two book versus movie episodes that I've done. But to get into some of the other changes from book to movie, one of the most significant differences in my mind is Holly's age, because in the book, when Fred first meets her, she is not even 19 years old. She is 18, almost 19. And by the time the story ends, she's like 20 or 21. Whereas Audrey Hepburn was like 32 years old while filming this. And even if they are trying to pass Hepburn as being younger, she still is clearly not in her late teens. And so I feel like her age in the movie kind of makes her come across as like the stereotypical manic pixie dream girl who doesn't want to grow up, and she is partying all the time and doesn't want to settle down, and her apartment is a mess, and she just comes across as irresponsible and immature. It makes her come across as someone who's just refusing to grow up, right? She's shoplifting, she's partying all night long, and she doesn't want to commit to anything, like not even giving her cat a name, right? Whereas in the book, the fact that she is in her late teens, it honestly doesn't make anything she does that unusual. Granted, I'm looking at this, you know, through my experience in today's age. But yeah, I'm just like, the way she's acting is very normal for someone who's 18, 19, 20. Like, she doesn't really come across as immature. She's just going through the normal phases that a girl goes through at these ages, right? Like, when I was her age, I was kind of similar, right? Like, I didn't want to commit to things. I was partying. I was irresponsible. My apartment was a mess. I was shoplifting. And obviously, I'm not saying that's how everybody is. And so, yeah, the dynamic of her character, like that age makes such a huge difference. In the book, like I said, it just was very understandable that she was doing the things she was doing. And also, I guess in the movie, because she's older and she's like wanting him to shoplift and wanting to do this and that, you know, you could see it as her either being immature, or it's like, wow, she's so cool because she's not letting society tell her what she should be. And even if she's older, she's still choosing to live this way. Like, what a rebel. Whereas in the book, she's kind of a rebel, but at the same time, it's like she's 19 years old. She's acting in a very normal way for a 19-year-old. Granted, this was 1958 and 19-year-olds were not expected to act this way. So I guess that adds another interesting layer to the story, is the fact that maybe in 1958, she was being more rebellious and acting in ways that were unique and different. Whereas if you look at it from today's age, you're just kind of like, she was being a very normal 19-year-old, in my opinion. So yeah, let me know your thoughts as far as that whole aspect goes. But yeah, of course, another change that I've already gone into is the fact that she and Fred fall in love, whereas in the book, Fred had been gay. And it was also interesting because in the book, we find out that Holly is bisexual, and that, of course, is not talked about in the movie. They do go to a strip club, but I don't think they were trying to imply anything by that. But also, Mag Wildwood and Rusty Trawler were bigger in the book. Like I said, she kind of had a relationship going on with Rusty, and then Mag was dating Jose. And so the four of them traveled. I forget where they went, but they went on vacation together. However, they end up coming back to New York City. And then Rusty ends up marrying Mag. And then when Holly is arrested, Fred calls them up to get help because they had been one of her friends, right? But Mag Wildwood just totally dismisses him, being like, we're done with Holly. She's a mess. We don't want to have any contact with her. And then, yeah, same. Jose is the one that Mag had been with, but near the end, Holly was going to marry Jose, but then that falls through. But another interesting thing in the book was that there is a female tenant in their building who really dislikes Holly. She disapproves of her lifestyle. She gets annoyed with her late night partyings and constantly, you know, people coming in and out. And she is the one who helps get her turned into the police later. However, later on when Holly's gone, a guy moves in and he has just as many parties. He's just as loud, if not more loud. And yet this woman loves this guy and she doesn't disapprove of him at all. And so the double standards, right, between what's accepted when it's a man versus a woman. Whereas in the movie, it is Mr. Yunioshi who is the main one who disapproves of Holly, and he is the one who sets her up to be arrested later. And he is in the book, but he's just kind of mentioned here and there, whereas in the movie, he was a consistent character. And of course, when talking about the movie, Mr. Yunioshi is the elephant in the room because he is played by Mickey Rooney in one of the most racist portrayals I have ever seen. And Blake Edwards, the director, he is quoted as later saying that he would give anything to recast that role role and how he regrets it. And then Mickey Rooney himself, decades later, he said, "They hired me to do this overboard and we had fun doing it. Never in all the more than 40 years after we made it, not one complaint. Every place I've gone in the world, people say, 'God, you were so funny.' Asians and Chinese come up to me and say, 'Mickey, you were out of this world.'" And Mickey Rooney also said that if he'd known people would be so offended, I wouldn't have done it. "Those that didn't like it, I forgive them, and God bless America, God bless the universe, God bless Japanese, Chinese, Indians, all of them, and let's have peace." Which is such a lame non-apology. Like the classic, like, "When I did it, no one cared. Everybody loved it. I don't know what the big deal is. We just were having fun." And then being like, "For those who were offended, I forgive them." Like, you forgive them? Like, he's not even apologizing. Instead, he's saying that he forgives people for being bothered by this. And I get whenever I mention things like this from like decades in the past, people always say like, it's unfair to judge them because you're looking at them through today's eyes rather than seeing it at the time, but I don't care. This was so messed up and there is no defending it. There is no defending Mickey Rooney and his choice to do this. I'm not saying Mickey Rooney as a person is therefore a horrible man. I'm just saying that this character was just, again, one of the most racist things I've ever seen on screen before. And I hate when people use the excuse of like, "At the time we filmed it, no one complained, everybody loved it." It's like, no, people didn't love it. There were people who were bothered, but at the time they felt like they couldn't say anything about it, In the description, I'm going to actually link to a review from 1961, and there was a reviewer who said, "Mickey Rooney gives his customary all to the part of a Japanese photographer, but his role is a caricature and will be offensive to many." So even at the time, there were people who were bothered by this and offended, and they were writing about it. But without the internet, I feel like certain critiques stayed more isolated. And also maybe Mickey Rooney just didn't want to hear what he didn't want to hear, right? So even if people were criticizing him, he was just in denial, not wanting to hear those negative reviews. So yeah, anyway, that is my Mr. Yunioshi tangent. It really brings the movie down, to say the least. But some final thoughts I want to mention before I wrap things up. So in the book and movie, Holly is being released from jail and she asks Fred to like get all of her stuff so that she can like go to the airport or whatever. And so he's trying to figure out how to transport her cat. And in the movie, in the taxi, the cat is like sitting in a pillowcase. But yeah, in the book, he says that he puts the cat in a pillowcase and he's just like carrying it in a pillowcase. And he says how it's like moving around a ton trying to get out. So that poor cat that was transported in a pillowcase. Like, wow, poor thing. But also there is the scene where Audrey Hepburn sings Moon River out on her balcony. And this is a reference to something in the book because he says that when Holly's hair is wet, she will sit out on the balcony waiting for it to dry and she will strum a guitar. And that, of course, created this now iconic scene. And then also Truman Capote, he had wanted Marilyn Monroe in the role of Holly Golightly, so he did not like Audrey Hepburn. But it's interesting because I've read a few reasons as to why Monroe wasn't cast. One being that her own agent or her acting coach encouraged her not to take the role because she already had an over-sexualized image in Hollywood. And so they were like, don't play an escort, it'll just feed into that. But apparently also studios didn't want Monroe in the role because she was a sex symbol. And so, even though Holly is still an escort in the movie, they kind of wanted to show that in a way that didn't focus as much on the sex. And so they cast Audrey Hepburn, who has more of an innocent look and she doesn't have the sexy look, Of course, she's still beautiful and stunning, but Monroe, she had just been a sex symbol in Hollywood. And so I guess they felt that it would draw too much attention to the fact that she was an escort if she also like had this sexual look to her, which again, like that's so frustrating because I get Marilyn Monroe was a sex symbol, but it's also just saying like, just because a woman is more shapely, she is therefore associated with sex, right? And this is a theme I've mentioned a few times. Like one that comes to mind is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, how there's a girl who develops faster than the other girls. And so everybody starts making rumors about her, how she like hooks up with other guys and like, oh, look at her boobs, they're so big. And they just associate her with sex just because of her shape, even though she herself like has never even done anything with a boy. And yet simply because she is curvy, people associate her with sex. And so yeah, so it's just a very frustrating issue that our society has. Anyway, I personally am a big fan of Marilyn Monroe. I think she's a fantastic actress, even though she's older than Audrey Hepburn. So at this time, she would have been too old for the role, in my opinion. But if she had been younger taking on this role, I think she would have done an amazing job. But also George Peppard, who plays Fred, apparently he was a nightmare to work with. Like for one, he felt that the relationship between he and the Patricia Neal character, he felt that was emasculating for him to be like relying on this woman for money, and he did not like that dynamic. But also like he would just go against the director and Blake Edwards would tell him one thing and he would just be like, nah, I'm doing it my way. And so yeah, apparently nobody liked working with him. But when it comes to book versus movie, so I've seen this movie multiple times. The first time I saw it, I was like 10, maybe younger, but me and my family, like we were big Audrey Hepburn fans. And so I've seen a lot of her movies. And I have always felt that this one is a bit overrated. Like her performance is fine, but it's like her most famous role, right? She's so iconic for being Holly Golightly. And I just don't really get it because she gives better performances in other movies. And then the storyline itself has just also never really done much for me. So as far as the movie goes, I'm not a huge fan. And then this was my first time reading the book and I liked the book, but again, it didn't do much for me either. So this just isn't a story that resonates with me. And I know there's people who like really love this. So if you love either book or movie, comment down below and let me know the details as to why this holds a special place in your heart. But for me personally, I just felt like they were fine, but it didn't like do anything special for me, I guess. And when it comes to which one I prefer, I am going to say the book wins, partly because I do not like the added romance when Hollywood feels the need to include a love story when there wasn't one originally. Sometimes it works, but oftentimes I just find it annoying. Why can't two people of the opposite sex just be platonic friends, right? Like it makes me think of Mad Max Fury Road. One of the reasons I love that movie is the relationship between Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron, how they just have this platonic relationship, right? This respect and love for each other, but it's nothing sexual, you know? So anyway, I don't like that added aspect to the movie. And then also Mickey Rooney is Mr. Yunioshi. He really affects the viewing of this movie because because the scenes with him were just so bad. So yeah, it is going to be the book on this one. So thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts on Breakfast at Tiffany's down below in the comments. And since I mentioned the virgin suicides, I will go ahead and link to that video on the screen as well. So if you want more book versus movie content, you can check that out. That was also a book versus movie poll winner. So that's kind of funny that they reminded me of each other to some extent. But yeah, thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time. Bye.